The world had fallen silent. Skyscrapers pierced gray clouds. Streets once filled with life now empty. The distant hum of engines replaced by an eerie quiet. A pandemic had swept through nations with relentless precision, leaving hospitals overflowing, governments paralyzed, and ordinary people trapped in fear. Humanity had thought itself invincible, yet in the stillness of deserted cities, an ancient mind appeared to remind them of their fragility. Thales of Miletus, philosopher, mathematician, and observer of the heavens, walked the empty streets as if he had always belonged there. Cloaked in simple robes, his eyes reflected centuries of thought, curiosity, and insight. He saw what humanity had overlooked, not just the virus that attacked the body, but the contagion of fear, arrogance, and greed that spread even faster. He first appeared to Dr. Elena Morales, a virologist who had lost hope after months of failed experiments. She stared at the man who stepped into her lab unannounced. Who are you?" she whispered. "I am a witness," Thales said. "Not to the past, but to what you fail to see in the present. You fight the disease in the body, yet ignore the disease in society. Look at the patterns, not only of infection, but of behavior, of neglect, of choices. These are the true vectors of your world's suffering." Elena, exhausted, could barely respond. "I've tried everything. The virus adapts faster than we do. There's nothing left to try." Thales placed a hand on a nearby table, observing her work, the vials, the screens flashing endless data. "You seek answers in numbers alone. Knowledge alone is insufficient. Understanding, empathy, foresight, these are your true tools. You cannot conquer what you refuse to comprehend." Meanwhile, across the globe, Thales moved silently, but with purpose. He confronted world leaders in their fortified offices, CEOs hoarding life-saving supplies, and policymakers arguing over borders and blame. "Power without wisdom is a contagion more lethal than any virus," he said. "You govern people, yet fail to govern your choices. Your decisions ripple farther than you imagine, and the consequences will consume even you if unchecked." At first, few listened. Some dismissed him as a madman, others feared him. Yet his presence was magnetic, undeniable. Communities began to notice subtle changes where he appeared. Volunteers organized themselves more effectively. Neighbors shared resources without being told, and the spirit of collaboration sparked in ways that technology and authority could never mandate. One night, he stood atop a crumbling bridge overlooking a city of flickering lights, observing the patterns of infection, human movement, and behavior. "Even in chaos," he murmured, "there is order to be found. Observation, reason, and courage can guide the lost." Thales' guidance became increasingly direct. He worked with exhausted doctors, teaching them to see beyond symptoms, to anticipate societal reactions, to consider ethics alongside science. He brokered alliances between nations that had long been adversaries, showing them that collaboration was not merely a moral choice, but the only way to survive. In boardrooms and laboratories, on street corners, and in makeshift hospitals, his ancient wisdom reshaped modern strategy. Eventually, he spoke to the world directly. Screens across continents lit up with his presence. "You fight this virus as if it exists in isolation," he said. "It is not the only enemy. Ignorance, selfishness, and fear are equally deadly. Science without wisdom, action without empathy, knowledge without foresight, these will destroy you faster than any pathogen." Millions listened, millions scoffed, but millions acted. Citizens organized their own networks, sharing resources, tracking outbreaks, caring for the vulnerable. Doctors and scientists collaborated globally, using Thales' principles to anticipate new mutations and implement rapid containment strategies. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The virus that had once seemed unstoppable was met not only with medicine, but with the power of a unified, thoughtful humanity. Yet, as hope returned, new challenges emerged. Mutations appeared, panic threatened to surge again, and old conflicts resurfaced. Thales guided humanity through each crisis, not with magic or force, but with insight, observation, and unwavering logic. He showed that survival was not guaranteed by technology or brute strength, but by collective wisdom and ethical action. Finally, After months of relentless struggle, the world began to recover. Streets filled with cautious life, markets reopened, and laughter returned to neighborhoods that had long forgotten it. Thales climbed a hill overlooking the horizon as dawn broke. A child approached him, eyes wide. "Will you stay with us?" she asked. "I am not here to stay," Thales replied. "I am a lesson. Remember this. Knowledge guides your hands, but wisdom guides your heart. Fail in the latter, and the world will demand another teacher." And then he vanished. Where he had stood, only a stone tablet remained, inscribed with words that would echo across generations. Observe, understand, act wisely. Only then can humanity survive, not just this pandemic, but itself. The world had been forever changed, not by a virus alone, but by the ancient insight of a mind that transcended time, revealing that survival, true survival, comes not from might or fear, but from the courage to understand, the wisdom to act, and the empathy to connect with one another. Even now, as cities rebuild and life resumes, the question lingers in every heart. If Thales returned, what other truths might he reveal? The pandemic was far from over, yet humanity was beginning to understand the fragile thread that connected survival to wisdom. Thales moved through cities that were both recovering and teetering on the brink of collapse. In New York, he walked the empty streets of Manhattan, observing first responders and volunteers struggling to coordinate overwhelmed hospitals. He spoke to them quietly, pointing out patterns in resource distribution that no modern software had detected, showing them how small adjustments could save thousands of lives. In London, he confronted government officials debating lockdowns versus economic recovery. "You measure only wealth and infection rates," he said, "but you do not measure morality. The cost of neglect is invisible until it becomes irreversible. Decide wisely, for history will judge you not by power, but by conscience." Some dismissed him as a philosopher from legend, but others began to see the logic in his reasoning. Policies shifted, communities rallied, and subtle order emerged from chaos. In Mumbai, Thales guided a group of doctors and volunteers through densely populated slums. "Observe not only the virus, but the society it inhabits," he instructed. "A disease spreads where fear and ignorance reign. Treat the people as you would treat the world itself, with attention, care, and reason." Slowly, makeshift medical centers organized themselves. Information was shared more effectively, and the infection rate began to fall in areas where previously it had soared uncontrollably. As the virus mutated again, panic threatened to erase all progress. A powerful new strain emerged in multiple countries simultaneously, overwhelming nations that thought they had learned their lesson. Thales convened a council of scientists, policymakers, and volunteers from across the globe. "This is your test," he said, "not only of intellect, but of character. Act as one organism, not as isolated minds, or you will fail." Under his guidance, a global network was formed. Nations shared research data instantly. Medical teams were deployed strategically based on predictive models that combined science and human behavior. Ethical distribution of vaccines and resources became a standard rather than a suggestion. For the first time, humanity fought a pandemic as a single, intelligent system, coordinated not by fear, but by understanding. Yet, the true battle was not against the virus alone. Corruption, fear, and selfishness still festered. Thales confronted a pharmaceutical magnate who planned to hoard vaccines for profit. "You think wealth can shield you," he said, "but arrogance is contagious and far deadlier than any pathogen. Share what you have, or history will share your downfall for you." Within weeks, the magnate's plans collapsed as his hoarding was exposed, proving once again that wisdom, not money or power, determined survival. Amid the chaos, Thales inspired countless acts of human courage. Ordinary citizens led rescue missions, strangers protected the vulnerable, and doctors risked their lives in ways no algorithm could predict. Every act of empathy, every choice guided by understanding, became a weapon against the invisible enemy. Slowly, the pandemic began to recede, but the lessons Thales imparted remained. As the world rebuilt, Thales walked to the edge of the desert, far from the noise of civilization, watching as humanity struggled to integrate the lessons learned. A young journalist approached him, notebook in hand. "Will the world remember what you taught?" she asked. "Some will," Thales replied. "Some will forget. But even those who forget will feel the consequences. Knowledge is fleeting, but wisdom endures if you choose to cultivate it. The pandemic is over, but the test has only begun. Humanity must decide. Will it repeat its mistakes, or will it rise?" Then he vanished into the horizon. Where he had stood, only the faint echo of his voice remained, carried on the wind through cities, fields, and oceans. The future belongs to those who observe, understand, and act with conscience. Fail in this, and no medicine, no technology, no power will save you. Learn, and you will endure. Across continents, in quiet conversations, in classrooms, and in emergency rooms, people repeated his words. They became a mantra, a reminder that survival was not merely about fighting disease, but about fighting ignorance, fear, and indifference. Humanity had survived the virus, but the philosopher's true lesson lingered. The world would never truly be safe without wisdom guiding its heart. Even as life returned to cities, markets, and schools, the question persisted. If Thales could return again, what would he reveal next about the choices humanity continues to make? And somewhere in the silence, the stars shone over a world forever changed, not by a virus alone, but by the awakening of insight, courage, and the collective will to understand. As the world attempted to breathe again, the virus had left scars far deeper than the physical ones. Nations were politically fragile, economies teetering, and society itself fractured by fear and mistrust. Thales of Miletus, walking silently among cities that were slowly reawakening, saw the invisible chains that still bound humanity: greed, arrogance, and apathy. The true test was only beginning. In Tokyo, Thales observed scientists racing to adapt vaccines to the new mutations. He spoke directly to them. "You are brilliant, yet brilliance alone cannot conquer this challenge. Observe the world as a living organism. Predict not only mutations in the virus, but patterns in human fear, hope, and behavior. Only then can your work save millions." Researchers, initially skeptical, began implementing his insights, adjusting distribution strategies, anticipating social responses, and collaborating internationally in unprecedented ways. In Washington, D.C., a political summit teetered on collapse. Leaders bickered over blame, borders, and power. Thales appeared quietly behind the podium as the cameras rolled. "Your quarrels are irrelevant," he said. "What matters is not who controls power, but whether your decisions preserve life. Every choice you make resonates beyond your city, your country, your era. History will remember those who acted wisely and punish those who acted selfishly." The room fell silent. Some laughed nervously, some froze. Slowly, debates shifted from ego to action, and emergency policies were enacted that would save millions. In Sao Paulo, slums were still struggling with infection clusters. Thales worked alongside local volunteers and healthcare workers. "Do not underestimate the power of connection," he said. "You cannot simply treat the virus. You must heal the society in which it thrives. Organize, empower, communicate. Even a single act of understanding can ripple outward, saving lives you cannot yet count." Communities adapted, teaching each other hygiene practices, forming supply chains, and monitoring vulnerable residents with precision and care. Amid this recovery, a new threat emerged, not biological but digital. Misinformation spread like wildfire, inciting panic and undermining the careful progress that had been made. Thales addressed this new challenge with clarity. Fear and falsehood are as contagious as any pathogen. Truth must move faster than rumor, and wisdom must outpace panic. Guide minds, not only bodies, if you wish to survive. Tech platforms, governments, and citizen networks began implementing rapid fact-checking, public education campaigns, and coordinated messaging, proving that even modern society could adapt when guided by reason. Then came the critical moment. The virus struck again in multiple regions simultaneously, testing humanity's resilience to its limit. Thales convened the Global Council of Doctors, Scientists, Leaders, and Volunteers. "This is the true trial," he said. "You are not merely fighting a disease. You are fighting complacency, selfishness, and division. Your actions now will define your civilization for decades to come. With his guidance, a synchronized response was launched across continents. Vaccines were distributed ethically and efficiently. Early warning systems were strengthened, and communities took ownership of localized solutions. Citizens became active participants in their own protection, inspired by Thales' insistence that survival required collective intelligence and empathy. In the aftermath, as the pandemic began to fade for the final time, Thales stood atop a quiet hill overlooking the recovering world. Cities glimmered in the distance, rivers shimmered with sunlight, and the wind carried faint echoes of life returning. A young woman approached him, holding a tablet filled with community initiatives and recovery projects. "Will it last?" she asked. Thales gazed at the horizon. "Only if humanity remembers. Knowledge is plentiful, but wisdom is rare. You have survived the virus, but the test of the human heart continues. Choose compassion, insight, and foresight, and you will endure. Choose ignorance, and the world will demand a harsher teacher." He vanished, leaving behind no trace but the lessons he imparted. Across continents, the word spread like seeds carried by the wind. Observe, understand, act with conscience. Only then can you survive not just a virus, but the consequences of your choices. Humanity had been forever changed, not merely by disease, but by an awakening. Individuals began to see themselves as part of a global organism, responsible not only for survival, but for the ethical and conscious shaping of the future. Governments, scientists, communities, and ordinary citizens understood at last that power without wisdom was a danger greater than any pathogen, and that empathy was the most potent form of defense. And yet, in quiet moments, when cities slept and the stars shone untouched above, a single question lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed him. If Thales returned again, what other truths would he reveal about the world we continue to create, and the choices we have yet to make? As the months passed, the world began to breathe again. Streets filled with cautious movement, schools and markets reopened, and laughter, tentative at first, returned to neighborhoods long silenced by fear. But the shadow of the pandemic lingered, not the virus itself, but the reminder of humanity's fragility, its interconnectedness, and the consequences of its choices. Thales walked among the recovering cities one last time, observing the patterns of human behavior that had shifted dramatically. He saw people choosing collaboration over conflict, compassion over indifference, foresight over recklessness. Small acts of kindness multiplied, systems became more resilient, and a new consciousness of shared responsibility emerged. Humanity had learned, at least partially, that survival was never about individual strength alone, but about collective wisdom, empathy, and understanding. He appeared one final time atop a high hill overlooking the horizon, the sun casting golden light across the awakening cities below. A child approached him, curious and hopeful. "Will you stay with us?" she asked, eyes wide. Thales smiled, serene. "I am not here to stay. I am a lesson. Remember this. Knowledge guides your hands, but wisdom guides your heart. Survival depends not only on what you do, but on how you think, and how you care for one another. Fail in this, and history will demand a harsher teacher." With those words, he vanished into the horizon, leaving behind only a stone tablet engraved with his message for generations to come. Observe, understand, act wisely. Humanity survives not by power, not by fear, not by invention alone, but by the courage to see clearly, to act justly, and to care deeply. Remember and endure. Across the globe, people whispered these words in homes, classrooms, hospitals, and boardrooms. They became a guiding principle for rebuilding societies, reconnecting communities, and rethinking the relationship between humanity and the natural world. Governments enacted policies with foresight, scientists collaborated openly, and ordinary citizens discovered the power of collective action. The virus had tested humanity, and humanity had risen to meet the challenge, not perfectly, but profoundly. Even as life returned to a semblance of normal, the question lingered in hearts and minds. If Thales could return again, what other truths might he reveal about the choices humanity still faces? And somewhere above all cities and nations, the stars shimmered, timeless witnesses to the awakening of insight, courage, and wisdom in a world forever changed, not by a virus alone, but by the enduring power of human understanding. The world had survived the pandemic, but more importantly, it had glimpsed the path toward something greater, a civilization guided by thought, empathy, and the knowledge that every choice echoes beyond the moment, shaping the future for all who would follow. And in that revelation, the story of humanity, once fractured and fearful, began a new chapter, one written not in despair, but in wisdom,